Modern London never sleeps, for somewhere someone is drinking, dancing, or gambling, and many more are working until dawn. This has always been the history of this great metropolis. The story in the Victorian era was no different, but it also had a nefarious side. When shops had long since closed and the roar of the streets had died away, there were still some that toiled by candlelight, perhaps stitching, merely to survive. But many souls wandered the streets or frequented dubious establishments that operated through the small hours. For by night the streets were, save for a lonely policeman or drunkard, the haunt of criminals, and the drinking establishments that kept serving through the night were little better. They were the dens of thieves, thugs, prostitutes, and those with nowhere else to go, where the wicked would prey on the innocent. Today, we journey through the streets of 1850s London by night, in the company of a Victorian author, recounting what he saw and the conversations he heard. You will discover what it was like to experience a night house, a boisterous and loathsome drinking and supper establishment, which Londoners of low character fell into when the theatres and dancing halls had closed their doors. Here, if you didn't fall victim to its patrons, then you would certainly succumb to the heavy stench of spirits and tobacco, not to mention the filth of its clientele. Before we move on, please consider clicking the subscribe button for more content like this. If you find this video interesting, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up and share it widely with friends and family. Please check out the description to see how you can support the channel and the content we make. Men who work hard, as a rule, rise early and go to bed early. Night is the time for rest. So far, at least, there is harmony between God's law and man's. The men and women who transgress are for the most part waifs and strays. Such are the denizens of our streets by night. Such are they who crowd, not alone the night public houses, but night coffee houses of our metropolis. Here, in London, these houses are of all kinds. For instance, let us enter one in the Haymarket. The rooms are as smart as gilding and ornamented paper and plate glass can make them. The waiters are got up regardless of expense. The coffee is good, but dear. The men and women are of the kind usually met with in this locality during the small hours. The greater part are fools enough to think it worthwhile to buy a little worldly wisdom at a price. It may be at the loss of their bodies and souls. None but madmen would think of paying. In such places as these, you are as sure to be injured as if you sat all night carousing in a public house. These women with forced smiles on their painted cheeks are the veritable harpies. Theirs is the true sardonic laugh. Do you remember one way in which the ancient phrase is accounted for? Sardinia, it was said, was noted for a bitter herb which contracted the features of those who tasted it. Pausanias says it is a plant like parsley, which grows near springs, and causes people who eat it to laugh till they die. And these women, have they not eaten a bitter plant? And do they not laugh and die? Beware of the women, beware of the men. See how their cunning eyes glisten if you change a sovereign. If they can get you into a neighbouring public house and rob you, they will be rather pleased than otherwise. Look at that tall fellow watching us. It was only the other day he met a man here, as he might you or I, and decoyed him into a public house close by, where his confederates were waiting, and robbed him of £40 when they thought their victim was sufficiently fuddled with champagne. He, and such as he, are not particular who they rob. They do not spare the women, I assure you. Let us now turn towards Covent Garden. The debauchery of Covent Garden is not what it was. Obscenity is banished from the Cave of Harmony, a more respectable night house, and better hours are kept. But there are night coffee houses about here. Dirty, shabby places, patronized by dirty, shabby people. How weary and wayworn are the women. They have been walking the streets for hours. They have been dancing in neighborhood saloons. They have paraded their meretricious charms. And here they sit, hungry, tired, sleepy. And 'tis 3 o'clock in the morning. No home have they to go to, but some wretched room for which they pay a sum equal to the entire rent of the house. There is little gaiety here. The poor comic, with his banjo and his double entendre, playing with all his might, in the hope that some gent will stand a cup of coffee and a muffin, can scarce raise a laugh. Timidly one asks, "Will you treat me to a cup of coffee, sir?" "Yes, forlorn one. If your sin is great, so is your punishment. Once you might have been a dainty little wife, and now what are you? I say it sorrowfully. The scum of the streets. Garbage for drunken lust. Let us go a little further on. Not into that house. There are only thieves and pickpockets there, and we might be bullied, which is not pleasant. Ah, here's the house we are looking for. It has done a good trade this many a year, for is there not a cab stand opposite, and a cabby knows the value of a cup of coffee on a cold winter's night? Never mind the smell, as business is carried on uninterruptedly during the 24 hours, and as the company belongs to that part of the population not guilty of an inordinate attachment to soap and water, and to whom cheap baths are a myth, it cannot be a matter of surprise if there be about the place an ancient and fish-like smell. But here comes the landlord. "Good morning, gents," in an under voice. "You'd better mind your pocket. There are some strange characters here. A cup of coffee?" "Yes, sir. Now then, sir, you had better wake up. It's time for you to be off. You've had a good hour's sleep." "Why not let him sleep?" "Why, you see, sir, such fellows would stay here all night and fill up the house, and not spend a penny. And business is business." A curious medley is here of sleepy, half-tipsy, sickly unfortunates. Yet even here the line is drawn. The door opens, and we dimly discern a mass of rags. So does our landlord, as he rushes to exclude the would-be customer. "What, are you trying it on again, are you? You know you can't come in here." "Why, you see, sir, if we let such fellows in, the place would swarm with—" You, dear listener, must supply the blank. But we take the hint, and not unreluctantly depart. The night public house has, I confess, and I am glad to do so, lost somewhat of its popularity in latter years. At one time it was common everywhere, and now it is only a few streets that exists and pollutes the atmosphere. In the Strand, in the Haymarket, in Oxford Street, night houses were numerous, but the one to which I more immediately refer was situated in the neighbourhood of Tottenham Court Road. Since then, Mr. Spurgeon, a Baptist preacher who engaged actively with the poor, has been preaching in that locality, but I dare say the night house exists, nevertheless. Let us suppose it is about 2 in the morning, and with the exception of 1 or 2 amiable garrotters, a few sleepy police, and some 3 or 4 women, the regular population of the neighbourhood may be safely considered to have been long in bed. The gas lamps shine almost exclusively on yourself. You look up at the windows, and you see no lights, save where, perhaps, poverty may be stitching for bread, or where death may have come an unbidden guest and borne away the fairest and the best beloved. At this hour the young bride in all her beauty may be struck down in mortal agony, or the wee pet lamb, whose little silver laugh had so dispelled the dark cloud that gathered round the home, or the grey-haired man, having just reached the goal and achieved an independence, may find himself left in this bleak, dark, wide world alone. Leaves have their time to fall, and flowers to wither at the north wind's breath, and stars to set, but thou hast all seasons for thine own death. And now let us forget all this, and knock at this door, above which streams a mellow light, and from which we hear sounds of boisterous gaiety. Is it not open yet? Then give another rap. Ah, it's all right now. Take care of your pockets, says Cerberus, a multi-headed dog that guarded the gates of Hades, in a low voice. There are some rum blokes here. We will, my friend. Yes, they must be rum blokes who come here into this filthy, stinking shop. And amongst this filthy, ragged, swearing crew of reprobates, if you wish to see a set of fellows whose mere looks would hang them, I think they are about us now. Even the landlord seems uncomfortable in their presence, and wisely allows as little as possible of temptation in his house or on his person. He knows, I believe, they would as soon rob him as anyone else, and his small ferrety eyes are evidently wide awake. Indeed, none of the party look as if they had much honest sleep, and in the daylight, I imagine, would present a somewhat seedy appearance. We generally think cabmen not scrupulously honest, but perhaps these cabmen, with ancient great coats and well muffled up, are the honestest fellows here. Then, of course, there is an Irish widder, with melancholy face and a string of ballads, such as Mary Blaine, The Red, White and Blue, Cheer, Boys, Cheer, all of which she is willing to dispose of on the most reasonable terms. A decayed swell, probably a railway director in the great year of bubbles, with extraordinary sponges, an article I should have thought quite as unsaleable as soap to the habitués, and a jockey-like looking person with knives, with most wonderful and unaccountable blades, or with some fancy work boxes or other articles, equally ingenious and useless. Women are here, of course, in the last stage of their prolificate career, driven out of decent houses, unfit to associate with the well-dressed and the young, wrinkled, repulsive, red, as you see them drink, quarrelling, screaming and cursing, as they always do till turned out to God knows where. Can you imagine that the difference between them and your own mother is merely that of circumstance, and education, and habit? Perhaps merely the difference produced by drink. I can tell you that little hag was once a rich man's leman, a lover or mistress, and robed herself in silk and satin, and quaffed her costly wine, and now hark how piteously she begs a drop of gin, ere she staggers to her wretched garret and straw to dream of a youth and gaiety, now no longer hers. Here she has warmth, light, and society, and the night house exists for such as she. And if, as is quite as likely as not, she is in league with some of the men around us, here she brings her victim, and then, stupefied by drink, she has only to decoy him down some dark passage, and he becomes an easy prey to the sneaking thief who comes skulking up behind. But let us listen. Me and my pals, we was a-going along the Edgware Road, and we saw— Hold your tongue, is the courteous reply. What do you mean by making all this row? Cries the landlord with a horrid oath. Now, then, old buffer, another quartern of gin. And a screw of tobacco, master, if you please. Well, old girl, what'll you drink? Well, I don't mind. What'll you stand? Suppose we has off and off? Ooh, aye, to be sure. And so the hours pass, and the place gets hotter, and stinks more and more every hour, for the men and women who have not a pleasant effluvium, and the hubbub becomes more intense. You tell me you would rather not stay here long. Well, I am quite of your opinion, for a couple of gentlemen with pale faces have been eyeing us most attentively ever since we have been here, and I confess their appearance is not prepossessing. Their short hair seems to indicate an acquaintance with one of the public establishments of the metropolis, with whose inmates it is not well to be too familiar. They are dressed in fustian, with thick boots well studded with nails, a kick from which on the head when a man is down would soon settle his business, and with their close-fitting caps, belcher handkerchiefs, and heavy animal faces, are certainly not very pleasant-looking young men. I should be sorry to intimate my suspicions to them,
as they may be noblemen in disguise, and might feel hurt at my want of charity. In the meanwhile, as the door is being opened and the coast is clear, I avail myself of the opportunity, and leaving the night house, am soon dreaming in my feverish slumber that I have just been garrotted and left for dead at the door of my domestic establishment, to the intense agony of my wife and children, of course, by the two amiable young people aforesaid, and I feel for some days after as if I have suffered terribly from a species of nightmare. So hideous is the life, so degraded the company, so revolting are the scenes at these night houses. I know not why the law permits them to open. I am sure they can answer no good or moral end. Mr. Norton, a few days since, said, in deciding a case at the Lambeth police office, he hoped a law would soon be passed to close night houses. On this, the police magistrates are unanimous.